My name is Claire Hutton and I am 37 years old. Last month, my phone rang at 11:30 on a Tuesday night. I was already in bed, half asleep, and when I picked it up and saw the name on the screen, I just stared at it for a moment. Not because I was surprised exactly. More because I had known, somewhere in the back of my mind, that this call was coming eventually. I just didn't know it would be 11:30 on a Tuesday. I didn't know her voice would sound like that. Small. Tired. Like something had finally run out. My sister Ashley was calling me. And she was crying before I even said hello. I want to tell you what she said. I will get to that. But first I need to tell you everything that came before it, because that phone call doesn't mean anything without the 34 years behind it. 34 years of watching my parents make choices. 34 years of being on the wrong side of every single one of them. 34 years of telling myself it didn't matter, I was fine. Some families are just like this, you learn to live with it. You do learn to live with it. But living with something and being okay with it are two very different things. And I spent a long time confusing the two. Before we get into this, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to know where you are right now. I grew up in a small town in Ohio called Millfield. Population 4,000, one stoplight, the kind of place where everyone knows your family and your family knows everyone, and reputation is the thing people protect most carefully because there isn't much else to protect. My parents, Frank and Donna Hutton, had lived there their whole lives. My dad worked at the county roads department. My mom did bookkeeping for a few local businesses from home. We weren't poor. We weren't comfortable either. We were the kind of family that made things work and didn't talk about the times when making things work was harder than it looked. Ashley was born 3 years before me. From the time I was old enough to understand what was happening around me, I understood that Ashley was the one my parents had organized themselves around. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way that anyone looking from outside would have necessarily noticed. It was quieter than that. It was the way my mom's whole face changed when Ashley walked into a room. The way my dad would stop what he was doing to watch Ashley perform. She did everything, dance and theater and cheerleading. She was the kind of girl who was always performing something for someone. The way the household schedule bent around Ashley's activities while mine were fit in wherever there was space left over. I was not a difficult child. I want to be clear about that because I think people sometimes assume that the child who gets less attention must have done something to cause it. I didn't. I was quiet, I did well in school, I didn't cause problems. I think in a different family that would have meant something. In my family it meant I didn't require management, and in my parents' economy of attention, not requiring management meant not receiving much of it. There's a specific memory I keep coming back to. I was 11 years old, 7th grade, and I had been chosen to read my essay at the school's end-of-year assembly. It was a big deal for me. I had worked on that essay for 2 weeks. I had read it to my bedroom mirror 40 times. I gave my parents the date 3 weeks in advance, wrote it on the calendar in the kitchen, reminded them the week before and the day before. Ashley had a dance recital the same afternoon. A recital she performed at every single year. One I had sat through countless times myself. My parents went to the recital. They didn't tell me they weren't coming to my assembly until that morning. My mom said she was sorry, she thought they could do both but the timing didn't work. She said my teacher would take a video. She said I'd do great. I stood at that podium in the school gymnasium and read my essay to an audience that included every other family in my grade except mine. I did great. My teacher said I did great. She did take a video. My parents never watched it. That's not the worst thing that happened in my childhood. Not even close. But it's the one that comes back most often because it has a particular kind of shape to it. It captures something exactly. The way their love for Ashley wasn't something they chose consciously, it was more like a gravitational force. Ashley was the sun in our family. Everything else orbited around her. Including me. Including my parents, who I think genuinely believed they were treating us equally because they never stopped to actually measure whether they were. I stopped trying to compete when I was about 13. I didn't make a decision about it exactly. It just happened gradually, the way a lot of things happen when you're young. You keep reaching for something, keep coming up short, and at some point your arm stops going up automatically. You learn to want less. You learn to need less. You learn to build a private interior life that doesn't depend on whether the people in your house are paying attention. That interior life saved me. And it made me someone my parents never fully knew. By the time I left for college at 18, I had been a stranger in my own home for years. I had just been too polite to say so. I got a scholarship to Ohio State. Not a full one, it covered tuition but not housing or food or the 100 other things that living somewhere costs. My parents contributed what they could, which was not much. I worked 20 hours a week at a campus cafe and took out loans for the rest. I didn't complain about it. I had watched Ashley get her car paid for, her senior trip paid for, her prom dress and her graduation party and the laptop she wanted. I had gotten the understanding that there wasn't money for extras. I had gotten good at not asking. At Ohio State I studied accounting. Not because I had a burning passion for accounting but because I was practical and I was good with numbers and I wanted a career that would make me financially independent as quickly as possible. Independence was the thing I had been working towards since I was 13 years old and decided to stop needing people who weren't going to show up. Financial independence was just the adult version of the same project. I was good at it. Better than I expected to be. I had a professor named Dr. Kaufman in my junior year who told me I had a particular kind of analytical mind, not just good at numbers but good at seeing patterns in numbers, which is a different thing entirely and a rarer one. He recommended me for an internship at a mid-size accounting firm in Columbus. I got it. By the time I graduated I had a job offer from them already in hand. I called home to tell my parents. My mom said "That's great, honey," and asked if I'd talked to Ashley lately because Ashley was going through a hard time with her boyfriend. My dad got on the line for about 2 minutes and said "Good job, kid," and handed the phone back to my mom. That was the graduation call. 3 minutes and a pivot to Ashley's boyfriend. I drove to Columbus and I started my life. Here's the thing about building a life quietly, without anyone cheering for you. You build it differently. You build it more carefully, more deliberately, because you know that if something goes wrong there is no safety net catching you. Every decision I made in my 20s I made with the full understanding that it was mine to make and mine to live with. That sounds lonely and it was, sometimes. But it also made me someone who was very clear about what she wanted and very consistent about going after it. By 26 I was a senior accountant. By 29 I was a manager. By 32 I made partner at a firm I had joined 3 years earlier specifically because I could see the trajectory it was on and I wanted to be part of where it was going. The firm, a mid-size operation called Hendricks & Cole, was growing into one of the more respected regional accounting practices in Ohio. Being a partner there at 32 meant something in our industry. I bought a house at 30. A real house, not an apartment, a 3-bedroom in a good neighborhood in Columbus with a yard and a mortgage I had calculated to the dollar that I could comfortably afford. I furnished it slowly, buying things I actually liked rather than whatever was cheapest, because I had earned the right to live in a space that reflected me. I had a good life. A genuinely good life. And I had built every inch of it myself. Meanwhile, in Millfield, Ashley's life was taking a different shape. Ashley had not gone to college. My parents hadn't pushed her to, her grades weren't strong and nobody in our family had a framework for understanding that college was something you work toward rather than something that either happens or doesn't. Ashley had worked a series of jobs in Millfield and the surrounding towns. Retail, then waitressing, then a receptionist position at a local insurance office. She had gotten engaged at 22 to a man named Travis who my parents loved because he was local and familiar and safe in all the ways they valued. Travis and Ashley got married when I was 23. I was a bridesmaid. I wore a dress the color of old mustard and smiled in every photograph and gave a toast that made people laugh and cry and felt, for the duration of that wedding, entirely invisible in the way that I had learned to feel invisible in that family without letting it show. My parents spent more on Ashley's wedding than they had contributed to my 4 years of college. I did the math. I had an accounting degree. The math was not hard. If you've ever been the child who got less your whole life while watching someone else get everything, drop a fire emoji in the comments. And if you think Ashley calling me at 11:30 at night is the beginning of some serious karma, type karma. The years between Ashley's wedding and that Tuesday night phone call were not dramatic. That's the honest truth about a lot of family estrangements. They're not built from one catastrophic moment. They're built from 100 small moments that accumulate until the distance between people is so wide that crossing it would require a conversation nobody knows how to start. I went home for Christmas most years. I went home for my parents' anniversaries, for birthdays when I could make it work with my schedule. I sat at the family table and watched my parents orbit Ashley the same way they always had. Ashley was still performing, still the center, still the person the conversation returned to regardless of where it started. Her job, her house, her marriage, her feelings about things. My job came up occasionally. My parents understood I was an accountant and that I did well. The specifics were beyond them and they didn't push for them. My dad sometimes said something like "good for you kid" when I mentioned something professional. My mom sometimes asked if I was seeing anyone, which was her version of caring about my personal life. Ashley's marriage to Travis started having problems around the time I turned 30. I know this not because Ashley told me. We were not close, had never really been close, had spent our whole lives in the same family without ever building an actual friendship, but because my mom called me periodically to give me updates that I hadn't asked for. Travis is working too much. Ashley feels neglected. They had a big fight. They're going to counseling. The counseling isn't working. I listened. I said the appropriate things. I did not offer opinions because my opinions hadn't been requested and because the truth was I didn't have a particularly deep well of sympathy to draw from. I know how that sounds. But the sister who was asking for my emotional resources is the same sister who had stood at her wedding and accepted a toast from me without ever once asking how I was doing. The relationship had a shape, and the shape was Ashley receiving and me providing, and at some point you start to notice the shape. Travis and Ashley divorced when I was 33. My parents took it hard in the way they took everything that happened to Ashley hard, as if it had happened to them personally. My mom called me 3 times in the week after Ashley told them, not to talk to me but to process her feelings about Ashley's situation. I was a sounding board. I had always been a sounding board. What happened after the divorce is what changed things. Without Travis's income, Ashley struggled. She had been working part-time at the insurance office and scaling back when things were tight in their marriage, assuming Travis's salary was the stable base. When he left, the base went with him. She couldn't cover her half of the mortgage on her own. She moved back in with my parents. She was 36 years old. She moved back into the bedroom she grew up in. And my parents, without any apparent conflict about the decision, reorganized their lives around her again. The same gravitational pull. The same orbit. As if no time had passed at all. My mom started calling me less. Not because anything had happened between us specifically but because her attention had somewhere more immediate to go. My dad's calls had always been infrequent and remained so. The contact I had with my family, which had never been abundant, thinned further. I noticed. I didn't say anything about it because what was there to say? You couldn't call your mother and say, "I notice you're paying even less attention to me than usual because Ashley moved home and I need you to redistribute your attention more equitably." That's not a conversation. That's a therapy session nobody had signed up for. So I said nothing. I kept building my life in Columbus. I made partner. I bought the house. I planted a garden I had always wanted. I got a dog named Ellis who weighed 60 pounds and acted like he weighed 15 and was the most consistently joyful presence in my life. And I waited, without quite knowing I was waiting, for the shape of things to change. The shape started changing about 8 months before Ashley called me. My mom had a health scare in January. Cardiac arrhythmia, her heart was doing something irregular, nothing immediately life-threatening but serious enough to require monitoring and medication and a significant reduction in stress. The cardiologist was direct with her, the lifestyle needed to change. Less worry, more rest, better food, fewer late nights. My mom, who had spent 68 years worrying about everything and everyone around her, was being told that worrying was now medically inadvisable. I drove to Millfield the weekend after her diagnosis. I sat with my parents and talked through the medical information and asked the questions I knew to ask and came home with a clear picture of what she needed and a list of follow-up steps I helped organize. I called her twice a week for the following month to check in. Ashley was living in the house. Ashley was there every day. My mom's care was, in practical terms, more immediately Ashley's responsibility than mine simply by proximity. I understood this and I didn't resent it. What I noticed, though, was that Ashley's management of that responsibility was uneven in the specific way that Ashley's management of everything had always been uneven. Some days she was attentive and present. Other days she was consumed by her own situation, the divorce settlement was still being finalized, there were money arguments with Travis, there was the ongoing question of what she was going to do next with her life, and my mom's medical needs came second to whatever Ashley was dealing with that particular day. My dad was not a man who managed emotional complexity well. He never had been. He dealt with my mom's health situation the way he dealt with most difficult things, by going quieter than usual and hoping someone else would handle the parts that required handling. That someone was me, from 2 hours away, on the phone twice a week. I have to pause here. What do you think happened when I started becoming the one my parents actually leaned on? Option A, Ashley got jealous and started competing with me for their attention. Option B, my parents finally started acknowledging what I had always been to this family. Option C, Ashley's situation got dramatically worse and she needed something from me specifically. Drop your answer in the comments. The answer is C. But B happened quietly alongside it, in the way that things sometimes shift without anyone announcing them. My mom's health stabilized over the spring. The medication worked. The follow-up appointments were good. But something had shifted in my relationship with my parents during those months of twice-weekly calls. My mom started actually talking to me. Not just updating me on Ashley or asking if I was seeing anyone. Actually talking. About her childhood, about things she regretted, about the years she sometimes wished had gone differently. About me, occasionally. Questions about my work that went beyond the surface level, questions about my house and my life in Columbus that showed she had been listening to things I'd said before and retaining them. It was small. It was late. But it was different than anything we'd had before and I held on to it carefully the way you hold on to something fragile that arrived later than it should have. My dad was slower. He is a man of very few words and most of those words are about practical things. But he called me on my birthday in April, not with my mom on the line, by himself, and he talked to me for 22 minutes, which is approximately 19 minutes longer than he had ever talked to me on the phone in my adult life. He asked about the firm. He asked about the house. He asked about Ellis the dog, whose existence he had registered but never previously asked about. At the end of the call he said, "You turned out good, Claire." I know we didn't always. He stopped. He started again. I know things weren't always even. I wanted you to know I see that. 7 words. I know things weren't always even. My 69-year-old father, who had never in my memory acknowledged the imbalance that had defined my childhood, saying 7 words that contained 34 years of everything he'd never said. I said, "I know, Dad. Thanks for saying it." He said, "Okay. Happy birthday." That was it. No grand apology. No tearful reckoning. 7 words and a birthday call. But I thought about it for days afterward and I still think about it now because it was real in a way that grand gestures aren't always real. It cost him something to say it. I could hear that it cost him something. And something that costs a person something is worth more than something that comes easy. Meanwhile, Ashley's situation was deteriorating in ways I was hearing about secondhand through my mother. The divorce settlement had finalized in March and had not gone the way Ashley hoped. Travis had a better lawyer. Ashley had underestimated how the assets would be divided. She came out of it with less than she expected and more debt than she had anticipated. She was still working part-time. She had applied for a few full-time positions and not gotten them. She was 36 years old, living in her childhood bedroom, with a financial situation that was getting tighter every month. My parents were helping her. Of course they were. This was what they did. This was the pattern, running as reliably as ever. The difference now was that their own resources were more limited than they had been. My dad's pension was fixed. My mom wasn't working anymore because of her heart. They were covering Ashley's portion of the household expenses and slowly drawing down savings that were not going to last indefinitely. I knew this because my mom told me. She told me with the particular tone of someone who is describing a problem without quite saying they need help, which is its own kind of asking. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time, because what Ashley asked me at 11:30 on a Tuesday night is where this whole story lands. The call came on a Tuesday in October. 11:32, according to my phone log, because I checked afterward. I had been asleep for about 40 minutes. Ellis had lifted his head from the foot of the bed when the phone rang and then put it back down, which is his assessment of most situations. I looked at the screen. Ashley Hutton. We had not spoken directly in almost 4 months. Our communication existed through my mother. She would mention something Ashley said, I would respond, the information would travel back. We had not been close enough for direct contact to feel natural and not distant enough for it to feel like estrangement. We existed in the ambiguous middle ground of sisters who share parents and a childhood and not much else. I answered. I said hey. She said, Claire. And then she was crying. Not the performed crying I had watched Ashley do my entire childhood, the crying she did when she wanted something and tears were the fastest route to it. This was different. This was the crying of someone who had run out of other options and was sitting alone in the dark with the phone and no performance left in them. I waited. I let her cry for a minute without saying anything because I know from experience that people need to finish before they can talk and interrupting the crying just makes it longer. She said, I'm sorry to call you so late. I said, it's okay. What's going on? She said, I need to ask you something and I need you to know that I know I don't have the right to ask it. I sat up in bed. I turned the lamp on. This was not a conversation I was going to have half asleep. She told me the situation in full. The divorce settlement had left her with debt she hadn't fully disclosed to my parents because she was embarrassed and because she knew they would worry and because old habit dies hard even when you're 36 and the habit is letting your parents manage your perception of yourself. The debt was significant. She had missed 2 payments on a personal loan. Her credit was taking damage. She had a job interview the following week for a full-time position that would change things, she said, if she got it, but she needed to make 1 payment to stop the bleeding before the interview because the stress of it was affecting her ability to function and she couldn't afford the payment right now and she couldn't ask mom and dad because of mom's heart and because they had already given her so much and she couldn't tell them how bad it actually was. She needed to borrow $2,000. She said it plainly, at the end. After all the context and the explanation and the apology built into the way she was speaking. $2,000. And then she said, I know. I know, Claire. I know what this looks like coming from me. I sat there in my lit bedroom with Ellis looking at me from the foot of the bed and my sister's voice on the phone and 34 years of context arranged around me like furniture in a room I had been sitting in my whole life. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment. It was not triumph. I know some people reading this might expect me to feel triumph, the overlooked sister finally in a position of power over the favorite, the satisfaction of the wheel turning. I did not feel that. What I felt was tired. A deep, old, structural tiredness that had nothing to do with the hour and everything to do with how long I had been carrying the shape of our family dynamic without being able to put it down. I also felt something else. Something I had not expected. I felt sorry for her. Not the pitying kind of sorry. The genuine kind. The kind that comes when you see someone clearly enough to understand how they got where they are, not just the recent decisions but the whole architecture behind them. Ashley had been handed everything and it had not protected her from anything. It had left her without the skills to protect herself. I didn't answer her right away. I said, "Let me think about it." She said okay. She said thank you for not just saying no. She said she would understand if I said no. She said she was sorry for everything, which was a big thing to say at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, and I wasn't sure yet how much it meant or whether she knew herself how much it meant. I said, "I'll call you tomorrow." After we hung up I sat with the lamp on for a long time. Ellis moved up from the foot of the bed and put his head in my lap, which he does when he can tell I'm in my own head about something. I appreciate that about him. I thought about the assembly when I was 11. The video my parents never watched. The mustard bridesmaid dress. The 3-minute graduation call that pivoted to Ashley's boyfriend. My dad's 7 words on my birthday. My mom talking to me like a person in the months after her diagnosis. The shape of things, and whether the shape was changing, and what it would mean to respond to that change generously versus cautiously. The next morning I called my mom. Not to tell her about Ashley's call. Ashley had specifically asked me not to because of my mom's heart and I respected that. I called her just to talk. We talked for 40 minutes. About her week, about Ellis, about a book she was reading, about a neighbor who had done something she found funny. Normal things. The kind of conversation I had been having with her more often in recent months. At the end of the call I said, "Mom, can I ask you something?" She said of course. I said, "Do you think Ashley and I are okay? As sisters?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think you could be. I think there's more there than you've been able to use." I said, "Do you ever think about how things were divided up when we were growing up?" Another pause. Longer this time. Then she said, "Yes. I think about it more than you'd think." I said, "Why didn't you ever say anything?" She said, "I didn't know how. I thought if I said it out loud it would mean I had done something wrong." I said, "You had done something wrong. You both had." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "I know that. I've known it for a long time." It was not an apology exactly. But it was an acknowledgement. And from my mother, who had spent 68 years not acknowledging things, it was as close to an apology as the architecture of her personality was going to produce. I decided to take it as one. I called Ashley that afternoon. She answered on the first ring, which told me she had been waiting and trying not to show she was waiting by waiting long enough for it to seem like she had other things going on. "I know my sister. Some things don't change." I said, "I'm going to help you. But I want to tell you something first and I need you to actually hear it." She said, "Okay." I said, "I don't want this to be a loan. I don't want you to owe me money because money between sisters who already have a complicated relationship makes the relationship more complicated. I'm going to give you the $2,000. But I want something in return that isn't money." She said, "What?" I said, "I want us to actually talk. Not through Mom. Not the Christmas table version of talking where we're both performing being fine. Actually talk. About what our family was like. About what it was like for me growing up. About what it was like for you. I want to have a real conversation at least once and see if there's anything real underneath it. That's what I want." She was quiet for long enough that I wondered if I'd asked for too much. Then she said, "Yeah. Okay. I can do that." I transferred the money that afternoon. $2,000. I did not think about it as a grand gesture. I thought about it as a choice, a deliberate, eyes-open choice to respond to my sister's need without keeping score, because I had spent enough of my life keeping score and the accounting had never made me feel better. It had just made me more precise about my grievances. Precision about grievances is not the same as relief from them. The real conversation happened 2 weeks later. Not on the phone, I drove to Millfield on a Saturday, which I had not done outside of holidays in years. I told my parents I was coming to see Ashley and they were visibly pleased in a way that made me realize they had wanted this for a long time without knowing how to engineer it. Ashley and I sat at the kitchen table after dinner while my parents watched television in the other room. We had coffee. The first 10 minutes were the surface version, her job interview, my week at the firm, Ellis, and his behavioral quirks. The comfortable nothing of two people who don't know each other well enough to skip the preamble. Then Ashley put her mug down and looked at me and said, "I want to say something and I don't know if I'll say it right." I said, "Try." She said, "I knew. When we were growing up. I knew things were different for you than they were for me. I didn't think of it as unfair exactly because when you're the one getting more you don't have the same relationship to it as the one getting less. But I knew. And I never said anything. Not to you. Not to Mom and Dad. And I've thought about that. Especially recently. I've thought about it a lot." I looked at my sister. 39 years old, tired in ways that showed on her face, sitting in the kitchen we grew up in trying to say something honest for what I think might have been one of the first times in our adult lives. I said, "Why are you thinking about it now?" She said, "Because I needed you and you helped me. And I couldn't figure out why you would do that. After everything." And the only answer I kept coming back to was that you're a better person than I would have been in the same situation. And that made me feel bad about who I've been. Which I probably should have felt a long time ago, but here we are. I didn't tell her she was wrong. I didn't perform generosity I didn't feel. I just sat with what she said and let it be what it was. I said, "I helped you because you're my sister. Not because of anything else. Not because things are resolved between us or because I've decided to pretend the past was different than it was. Just because you're my sister and you needed help and I had it." She nodded. She said, "That's more than I deserve." I said, "Probably. But that's what you've got." She almost smiled. It was the closest thing to a real moment we had ever had. Sitting in that kitchen with cold coffee and 34 years of everything we hadn't said arranged around us. After that Saturday, things shifted. Not dramatically. I want to be honest about that because I think stories like this sometimes get tidied up into neat reconciliations and the reality is messier and slower and more uncertain than that. What happened was smaller. Ashley texted me the following week to tell me she had gotten the job. Full-time, decent salary, benefits. A real position. I texted back 3 words, "I knew it." She sent back a single emoji. A small yellow heart. The kind of thing that costs nothing and somehow means something. I drove to Millfield again the following month. Not for any occasion. Just because my mom had mentioned she was making the soup I grew up eating in the winter and I had a Saturday free and I wanted soup and something else I wasn't quite ready to name. My parents were different with me in the way they had been trending toward different for months, more present, more attentive, asking questions rather than just delivering information about Ashley. My dad watched a show with me after dinner without going to his study at 8 o'clock like he had my entire childhood. My mom told me about something I had done at age 7 that she had always found funny and had never told me before. It was a small story. But she remembered it. She had been paying attention at age 7 even when I thought she wasn't. Ashley was there for dinner. We sat next to each other at the table, which we had not done voluntarily since we were children. We talked. Not the deep version, "We're not there yet, maybe we'll never be fully there," but the real version. The version where two people are actually speaking to each other instead of performing for the room. At one point my dad looked at the two of us and he didn't say anything. He just looked. And I saw something in his face that I am not going to overdescribe because it was private and it was his. But it was the face of a man seeing something he had wondered for a long time whether he would get to see. Both his daughters at the table. Not performing. Just there. I am not going to tell you my family is fixed. Families don't fix the way appliances fix. What they do, if you're lucky and if the people in them are willing, is slowly and imperfectly rearrange into something more honest than what they were. Something that has room for the truth about what happened alongside the possibility of something different going forward. My parents chose Ashley over me my whole life. I don't think they'll ever fully understand the cost of that because some damage is invisible to the people who caused it. But they are trying, in the limited ways they know how to try. My dad's 7 words on my birthday. My mom's acknowledgement at the kitchen table. These are not enough. But they are real. And real is more than I had for a very long time. Ashley got her first full paycheck from the new job and she called me. Not to tell me she was paying me back, I had told her it was a gift and I meant it. She called to tell me she had opened a savings account. That she had put $300 in it. That she was doing something she had never done before in her life, building something for herself instead of waiting for someone else to hand it to her. I said, "Good. That's how you do it." She said, "Is it hard?" I said, "Yes. Especially at first. Then it gets easier. Then it becomes the thing you're most proud of." She said, "How do you know that?" I said, "Because that's how it went for me." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I want that." I said, "I know. You can have it. You just have to build it." She said, "Okay." That one word. Okay. Like a door opening instead of closing for once. It has been 3 months since that Tuesday night phone call. 3 months is nothing in the timeline of a family rearranging itself. I know that. I am not standing here telling you everything is resolved and the relationship is healed and we all learned our lessons and gathered around the table and became the family we should have been all along. That is not what happened. That is not what happens. Families don't transform in 3 months. They transform slowly, in increments, when the people in them decide that honesty is less dangerous than the performance of everything being fine. What I can tell you is what is true right now, 3 months in. Ashley has kept the job. She has added to the savings account every paycheck. She texts me occasionally, not daily, not even weekly, but occasionally, and the texts are real rather than performative. She told me last week that she had started therapy. I said, "Good." She said, "It's harder than I expected." I said, "It always is." She said, "Did you do it?" I said, "I did it for 2 years in my early 30s. Best investment I ever made and I'm an accountant so that means something." She actually laughed. A real laugh. I have heard my sister perform laughter my entire life and I know what the real version sounds like because I have heard it so rarely. That was the real version. My parents are managing. My mom's heart is stable. My dad calls on Thursdays sometimes now, not just birthdays. The calls are short and practical but they happen. He asked me last week if I had enough firewood for the winter, which is the kind of question that means he is thinking about whether I am okay. He doesn't have another way to ask it. But that is his way of asking and I have decided to receive it as the thing it is. I have been thinking a lot lately about what I actually wanted from all of this. Not as a child, I know what I wanted as a child. I wanted to be chosen. I wanted my parents to turn the full weight of their attention toward me even once and mean it. I wanted to matter as much as Ashley. I spent 34 years wanting that and not getting it and building a life despite not getting it, which is its own kind of answer to the wanting. What I want now is different. Smaller in some ways. More specific. I want honest relationships with the people in my family who are capable of honesty, even if those relationships are limited by what those people are capable of. I want my sister to become someone who can take care of herself, not because I need her to pay me back but because I genuinely do not want to watch another person I share blood with be defeated by the same family patterns that almost defeated me. I want my parents to spend whatever time they have left actually seeing me, rather than managing the idea of me. Some of that is happening. Slowly. Imperfectly. In the incremental way that real change always happens, without announcement, without drama, in the daily accumulation of small choices that gradually add up to something different. My sister called me begging last month. She called because she had nowhere else to turn and she needed help, and I was the only person she could think of who might help her without conditions she couldn't meet. She was right about that. I helped her. Not because I had forgiven everything. Not because the past had been addressed to my satisfaction. Not because I had decided to pretend our family had always been something other than what it was. I helped her because I had spent 34 years being the one who needed help and didn't get it, and I knew exactly what that felt like, and I had decided a long time ago that if I ever had the chance to be different from what my family had modeled, I was going to take it. That's not mercy. That's not nobility. That's just what you do when you've worked hard enough on yourself to have something to give and you choose to give it anyway. My name is Claire Hutton. I am 37 years old. I am a partner at an accounting firm in Columbus. I have a house and a garden and a 60-pound dog named Ellis who acts like he weighs 15. I built every piece of it myself, without anyone cheering, without a safety net, without ever being the favorite. My parents chose my sister over me my whole life. Last month she called me. And I answered. Not because she deserved it. Because I did.